Wow, what an incredible week. First, let me just start off by saying that you can not listen to this and read the notes I post below. It's going to be the same exact thing. So it's up to you whether you prefer reading or listening. Um, so, um, to start, this week we examined the common good approach and John Rawls' justice as fairness approach to ethics. From these perspectives, we examined our current justice system in relation to inequalities that are still present today, specifically as observed through the statistics of hate crimes, as well as in vast differences between the application of the death penalty for convicted black people as compared to convicted white people that was outlined in our weekly readings. Specifically, the link from the Department of Justice and the FBI for hate crimes, and the DPIC, Death Penalty Information Center fact sheet. I'd also like to thank you guys for your honesty in your journals when talking about your biases. I know that is not easy for some of you. With that said, I'd like to point out that almost every single one of you demonstrated your political bias. That's totally fine. Only 3 or 4 of you admitted as such, but from the first sentence or two of your papers, I could tell your political leanings. Again, which is fine, but just remember, as intelligence professionals, we must remain nonpartisan. This course certainly isn't political science, but we do encourage the diversity of ideas. I have 2 personal rules of thumb when it comes to politics and the intelligence community. 1, don't politically weaponize intelligence. So often over the last few decades, intelligence has been used for political gain. And 2, don't have one-sided viewpoints. We must be open to new ideas. As I said a second ago, diversity of ideas is a good thing. And listen to all sides. To help with this, utilize your individual code of ethics that you develop from this course and use it in the intelligence community. Moreover, remember that when we take a political stand against something, we often alienate the other half who don't have the same politics. Before I go on, here is some deeper analysis of the statistics done by a student in one of my other classes that might open your eyes. Sometimes we cannot take statistics as at face value. Given the population differences, a black person is actually 8 times more likely to be a victim of a hate crime than a white person. That's a chance of 0.0053% for blacks versus 0.0003% for whites. Even though more whites commit hate crimes in absolute numbers, as a percentage, a black person is by a 2-to-1 margin more likely to actually commit a hate crime. In numbers, 0.0032% of black people commit a hate crime versus 0.0011% of whites. While almost everyone agreed that the United States has the most just and fair justice system in the world, most agreed that there certainly could be some improvements, particularly when considering the cases we examined this week. Many of you argue that a justice as fairness approach aimed at common good by removing bias through the application of Rawls' veil of ignorance would help ensure a more just approach to law enforcement. Many of you agreed that it seems like a great idea in theory, but struggled with its implementation. In general, based on your creative suggestions and thoughtful insights, I observed a 4-part approach to how this might be accomplished. In the community, in making arrests, in the courtroom, and during incarceration. First, in the community, through education and training for law enforcement and civilians, through the school systems and workplaces, on detecting bias, ethics, and equal opportunity. Remember that we do have policies on the books such as affirmative action to help provide reparations for our nation's past discrepancies. However, I do think at some point things need to be earned based on merit. Next, by law enforcement personnel regularly and visibly interacting with the community from a positive perspective. Those of you with a criminal justice or law enforcement background may know this as community policing. volunteering in youth centers, feeding the homeless, rebuilding broken down homes, soup kitchens, things of that nature, and providing regular patrols of neighborhoods that some have thought to be forgotten until a crime takes place. Also, through the early education and training of our youth, beginning at home and in school, even offering education to parents on follow-through techniques, discipline, and consequences. Lastly, by providing more needed care to those with mental illnesses who aren't getting the help they need and deserve. Next, in making arrests, most of you argued that it would not be practical to remove all forms of physical profiling from police work. Gender, height, weight, age, and race are all factors that help police identify suspects and place them in a lineup for identification. Removing them would make police work extremely difficult, if not impossible. However, when examining how large-scale police work is conducted, here's where we can implement more unbiased policing through the use of activity-focused versus person-focused intelligence collection surrounding locations where the statistics have demonstrated criminal terrorist activity taking place. In the intel world, we know those as named areas of interest or targeted areas of interest. Third, in the courtroom and judicial system. This can be done through the use of blind juries, where the defendant remains behind a one-way mirror, where he or she can only see out but no one can see in, and their voice is masked and no information is provided to the jury on the defendant's race, their gender, sexual orientation, etc. As we discussed before, veil of ignorance. By providing top-notch lawyers to those who are not well off, paid for by the taxpayer or privately funded programs. That way they stand to have as equal of a trial to someone who can afford a good one. Next, by providing just and reasonable compensations for civil lawsuits. Many would argue that suing for millions of dollars because someone burned themselves on coffee isn't reasonable, but neither is letting someone out of prison for rape after a year or two of good behavior. But by removing the death penalty as a form of punishment. Next, through a retributive standardized system of punishments based on crimes committed. So those convicted of murder in Massachusetts get the same punishment for those convicted of murder in South Carolina. This, however, infringes against those who believe that the greatest quality of our justice system is that it allows states the power to make their own decisions on what is just. However, when we examine this issue, it's helpful to consider our history. When the U.S. was first formed, those who were for a more powerful central government, known as the Federalists, such as John Adams, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison, were in direct opposition to those who detested the idea of a strong central government, known as the Anti-Federalists, and they preferred the power to go to the people via the state, such as Thomas Jefferson, George Mason, and Patrick Henry. Even those who were in the same party were still greatly divided, and continued to be so until the country became under a great upheaval because of something it felt very passionate about, on top of many other things it disagreed on. So passionate that it was willing to go to war over it, the abolition of slavery. Today, most of us look back and see what a grievous thing slavery was, a failure of distributive justice, and would argue that it was something worth fighting for, something worth sacrificing the power in the hands of the state in order to form a more perfect union where everyone could be treated as individuals, as ends in themselves. Today we are starting to see such passion once again, over treating others who are different because of race, because of gender, because of sexual orientation, or religious preference, or even age. Perhaps now is the time to take more drastic strategies to find a common good that works fairly for everyone. Yes, that means sacrificing something of ourselves to create something better. In a day and age where individuality means everything, that's a tough pill to swallow. But perhaps it's a pill we'd all swallow willingly if it meant avoiding civil war again. In any event, one thing from our few weeks together is clear. Our class, like our country, is greatly divided as a result of our own belief systems and values. Yet, if this class can discuss these difficult issues in a civilized manner, trying to walk in the shoes of others and finding common ground from which to work, surely our country can do the same. Lastly, during incarceration and preventative measures before incarceration, through the use of a balance between rehabilitative justice combined with retributive and compensatory justice. Through a rehabilitative approach that begins with education on equality at the youngest grades and up to early intervention programs for at-risk youth and early release incentive programs for inmates for completing their GED, attending ethics, equality, and parenting courses, all aimed at helping them be able to contribute to society. Through a compensatory approach that allows those convicted of less severe crimes to pay off their debts to society through community service and giving back. Some of you argue this would be most beneficial for juveniles, particularly if used in conjunction with both retributive and rehabilitative justice, i.e. being treated as criminal, doing jail time in order to remind them their actions have consequences, and then rehabilitative intervention and community service to help keep them on the right track. Finally, this week we examined how John Rawls' theory of justice as fairness might be applied to the prison leaks by Edward Snowden. Though we're going to dig more into this case in weeks to come, what was interesting this week was seeing how, depending on one's point of view, the same theoretical approach could end up with different outcomes. For those who favored the liberty principle, the argument is that the government's prison program is unethical based on the violation of privacy, while others said so long as it was conducted equally on all persons for the good of the whole, it would be considered ethical. Again, as you've seen over the past 3 weeks, our preconceived notions, biases, values, and life experiences have shaped who we are. If we all attempt to have our way, as that we've seen in the political landscape for several years now, and we're not willing to find the common ground, we can never move forward. Instead, we end up implementing laws and regulations that work for half the population, not the other. And then the tides turn, decisions are uprooted, changed, and again, now work for the other half of the population. I'm proud of all of you this week for keeping our conversation focused on social issues that have ethical implications instead of falling into the trap of political viewpoints. Yet I feel that I must point out that the things you're discovering in this course about yourselves and about others are things that, if implemented at a much higher level, could change the world. You're discovering that in order to make real change, we have to be willing to sacrifice a little of ourselves for the betterment of others. And instead of focusing on our differences, we need to find our common ground. If we can do this in the classroom and later in our intelligence professions, we may just be able to influence decision makers to do the same. Have a great week, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions.